It was never supposed to be found, not by the railroad crew, not by the state surveyors, and certainly not by you, but here you are, hearing what was meant to stay buried in the black soil of Kentucky's forgotten mountains. Behind the Millbrook Inn, nestled deep in a pine-covered ridge, they found it. A clearing marked not by stone, not by names, but by silence. 43 graves, unmarked, uneven, and freshly disturbed. Now listen closely. This isn't folklore. This isn't some dusty campfire tale whispered by drunk old men with failing memory. No, this is blood history, real men, real names, and no one ever saw them again. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because this is a story America was never meant to remember. In 1847, the Millbrook Inn sat like a warm promise at the end of a cold journey through the Appalachian wilderness. And at its center, 4 sisters, Cunningham by name, angels by appearance. Margaret, the eldest, sharp as a blade and colder than January frost. Catherine, all eyes, all smile, all manipulation. Sarah, silent, watchful, trained in roots, toxins, and herbs. And Elizabeth, sweet-faced and barely grown, with a laugh that made even the cruelest man lower his guard. To travelers, the inn was sanctuary, but to the sisters, it was something else. A net, a theater, a carefully designed mechanism for extraction, not just of coin, but of soul, of breath, of existence itself. They didn't just kill, they calculated, they profiled. They studied you the way a surgeon studies the skin before the first cut. The lonely were especially easy, grieving widowers, drunk surveyors, exiled traders, men no one would miss, men whose names would fade like chalk in rain. They were offered warmth, food, sometimes even love, but every offering came with a price. This isn't just a murder tale, this is about institutional lindness. This is about how frontier mythology covers frontier horror. You're not supposed to know that America's expansion westward was lubricated with blood, and not always in battlefields. This inn didn't fail because of bad business. It didn't fall because of scandal. It was swallowed because someone finally looked too close. And now, so are you. Let's keep going. You won't come out the same. The man who almost exposed them was named Elias Benton, a railroad engineer from Virginia, sent by the state in early spring of 1847 to survey the Millbrook stretch for a new freight line. He was meticulous, sober, widowed, carried a leather-bound notebook like a priest carries scripture, and he made the fatal mistake of writing everything down. Elias arrived at the inn on March 2nd. Cold rain, broken wheel, mud halfway to his knees. The sisters welcomed him as if they'd been expecting him. Elizabeth brought him whiskey laced with something that didn't burn but dulled. Catherine hung his coat and whispered that dinner would be ready shortly. Sarah stayed silent, observing. Margaret asked the first question. "You're traveling alone?" He nodded, and just like that, the gears turned. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what happened next was buried deeper than the graves behind that inn. Elias stayed 3 nights. On the surface, he was treated like royalty, fresh bread, warm fire, clean linens. But by the 2nd night, something shifted. He stopped eating the stew, he poured the whiskey out his window, and most damning of all, he began walking the property, measuring, sketching, recording details not just about elevation and timberline, but about what lay behind the inn, the ground, the disturbances. It was on his 3rd night that he saw them. Torchlight, late, out back near the slope, 3 of the sisters carrying something wrapped in canvas, heavy, limp. No sounds but boots in soft dirt. They dug in silence, buried it deep, covered it like they'd done it 100 times, because they had. Elias didn't run. He returned to his room and wrote furiously for hours. Every detail, every name, every suspicion. He folded the papers, sealed them in wax, and left them beneath the floorboards near the hearthstone, tucked into the cracks like a man hiding scripture before the purge. He planned to leave before sunrise. He never made it out. The official report said missing. Locals whispered lost to the hills. But one farmhand, too drunk to lie, too dumb to shut up, said he saw 4 women carrying a sack the size of a man toward the ravine. said they were smiling. And when the inn finally burned months later, arson, some said, the only thing left intact was that patch of disturbed ground behind it. 43 graves, no names, no markers. But someone counted, and that someone, he's not done talking yet. You think you're hearing a ghost story. You're not. You're hearing a warning that was never meant to reach your ears, because the Millbrook Inn wasn't erased by time. It was erased by men with maps, with money, and with names you still recognize. This wasn't a forgotten crime. This was a covered one. When the fire gutted the inn in October of 1847, the official report blamed lightning. But there was no storm that night. Witnesses spoke of men on horseback, no local accents, no local faces, seen riding east before sunrise, and one of them, according to the town butcher, was carrying a steel lockbox and an oil can. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because this is where it gets dangerous. Months before the fire, strange letters started arriving at the postmaster's office in Boonville. No return address, just a single wax seal, burnt gold, a stylized C coiled like a serpent. Inside each envelope, a single page, typed, not handwritten, not ink, typed. The first letter detailed Elias Benton's disappearance, date, time, last seen locate, Ion. The second letter named 4 other men who had vanished near the inn in the previous year, all presumed lost in the wilderness. The third letter? That one was different. It contained a list of burial sites, with hand-drawn coordinates, just paces from the Millbrook Inn's eastern foundation. Those letters weren't written by a madman. They were written by someone inside. You see, not all the sisters agreed with what they'd become. Elizabeth, barely 17, had kept a ledger, a secret one, a trembling attempt at redemption written in childish script and stained with tears. Victim names, where they sat at dinner, what they drank, who gave the final dose, page after page, some scratched out, some underlined twice. When the state finally sent surveyors in 1851, they found nothing but ash, stone, and trees. But beneath one of the only remaining beams was a leather satchel sealed in wax. Inside, Elizabeth's ledger. But here's the twist. None of that was ever filed. The man in charge of the survey, Jacob Van Wright. He wasn't just a surveyor. He was a cousin of Margaret Cunningham. He took the ledger, buried the report, moved west. That's why you won't find this story in any library. That's why every mention of the Millbrook Inn ends in a blank page or a shrug. But this story isn't over, because there's one grave out back with no body in it, and her name was Elizabeth. She wasn't supposed to live. Elizabeth Cunningham, the youngest of the 4, was meant to be a witness that disappeared, a loose thread cut clean. But some threads resist the blade, and when the inn went up in flames, it wasn't her body they found in the rubble. It was a decoy. Charred bones, female, but too small, too brittle. Not hers, because Elizabeth had already fled. She'd left 2 nights before the fire, under the cover of fog and moonless sky, with only her ledger, a torn shawl, and a warning whisper. Head to the local priest, Father Delaney, a man already half mad from what he'd heard in confession. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what Elizabeth left behind may still be buried in yours. Delaney kept silent for a decade. He moved parishes, changed names, drank himself to sleep with communion wine. But in 1857, dying from pneumonia and guilt, he handed over a box to a traveling journalist from Cincinnati. Inside, pages from the original ledger, some burned at the edges, others stuck together with what looked like blood. Those pages are now missing, but one entry, the last one, was copied before they vanished. I was the only one who ever cried. Even Sarah stopped weeping when the men stopped struggling. I begged Margaret to let them go. She said they were already dead the moment they walked through the door. Catherine laughed, but I knew it wasn't true. They looked at me, they knew, and I buried my guilt under 43 stones. The handwriting breaks in the middle, shaky, rushed. Then a final line, jagged across the bottom. They will burn this place, but the ground remembers. Here's what they didn't expect. Elizabeth had written copies, hidden in hollowed-out fence posts, tucked into hymnals, mailed to places no one would look, rural churches, traveling medicine shows, poorhouse ledgers, a breadcrumb trail scattered across the country, and for nearly a century no one followed it. Until 1943, when a group of university students on a folklore research trip in Kentucky came across a dusty hymnal in a condemned chapel. Inside was a folded page. Millbrook was never an inn, it was a mouth. It swallowed men, and I was the only one who spat them back. Signed, E.C. They laughed, called it Gothic fiction, threw it away, but one student kept a copy, and he was never seen again. His name was Walter Ames, 21, folklore major, son of a war hero, and the last man foolish enough to laugh at Elizabeth Cunningham. Walter wasn't just C.E.E. Furious. He was obsessed. After finding that letter in the chapel hymnal in 1943, he started digging. First in archives, then in graveyards, then finally back in Kentucky, where the ruins of the Millbrook Inn had long been buried beneath moss, barbed wire, and a private property sign nailed to a tree with no house behind it. He was last seen on September 19, 1943, hiking alone with a journal, a compass, and a tape recorder. He was never seen again. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because this is no longer just a story. It's a pattern, a cycle, a curse if you believe in that kind of thing. When local police searched the area, all they found was Walter's bag, ripped open, half buried in red mud. Inside was a water-damaged journal. One entry was still legible, penciled in frantic, slanted handwriting. It's real, not just the graves, the earth itself. Something breathes under the stones. I heard it when I stepped between them. A hum, a groan, not wind, not storm. It sounded like voices, like someone remembering. The tape recorder was found a few feet away. Its reel snapped, half melted. To this day, no one has been able to explain the burn pattern on the plastic. There had been no fire, no lightning, no heat source at all, and yet the damage was surgical, focused, like something had targeted the machine. Within days, the university shut down the research project. Walter's name was scrubbed from the course records. His file was sealed under mental instability. His parents were paid a quiet stipend for their grief, and the wooded land where the Millbrook Inn once stood, bought, fenced, forgotten. By who? A shell company, established 2 weeks after Walter disappeared, traced to a post office box in New York. No board members, no officers. But the name of the company? Cunningham Holdings. They'd survived, changed names. Ved money, maybe even families. But the intent hadn't died in the fire, and neither had the land, because locals still whisper about nights when the trees moan in voices not their own, when dogs won't walk past the fence, when cell signals vanish, and when men with old maps and big questions go missing, just like Walter. By 1961, the land had a nickname, the Quiet 40. Locals wouldn't hunt there. Children were warned never to cut through it. Even the oldest generation, those with half a memory of the Millbrook fire, wouldn't speak its name above a whisper. The land didn't just lie silent, it watched. And that silence, it cracked one October morning when a group of surveyors from the state arrived to map the terrain for a potential highway bypass. They were just doing their job, marking soil levels, measuring distance, noting wind patterns. They weren't believers, not yet. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what those men found in the dirt has never been shown to the public, and one of them never made it out. The project manager's name was James Platt, Army vet, rational man. He wasn't prone to ghost stories or local superstition, but after just 4 hours on the property, he radioed his team with a trembling voice. "You're gonna think I'm nuts, but there's something under me. I swear I heard a woman humming. I think we hit a chamber." He was standing alone at grid marker C9, just a few feet from the old inn's foundation stones blackened by fire, half swallowed by roots. And then the radio cut. No scream, no wind, just static. When they found Platt's equipment, his survey rod had been driven clean through the soil, snapped at the base. His boots were still there. His map book opened to a page with shaky pencil lines scratched over the coordinates, again and again, forming a single jagged word: sister. There were no signs of struggle, No blood, no body. But his last photo, taken moments before the radio call, showed something. G behind him, a shadow, tall, feminine, but elongated, as if the frame of the figure didn't fit into the rules of the lens. The film was confiscated, the bypass cancelled, and the report buried in state records under unstable terrain, no development recommended. But the name Cunningham showed up again, this time tied to a donation, a very generous donation made to the Kentucky Department of Transportation, with one simple request: no construction within the perimeter of the Quiet 40. Who made the donation? No one knows. The listed address doesn't exist anymore, and yet the checks kept coming, for decades, to keep the land untouched, to keep the voices beneath undisturbed, to keep whatever breathes under those 43 stones. Asleep, a cold, wet spring in Mercer County. Most people were talking about the economy or the coal strikes up north, but on the edges of town something older was waking up, and it all started with a man named Charles Weaver. A drifter, mid-40s, no fixed address. He arrived with a canvas duffel and a strange set of tools, a Geiger counter, a copper dowsing rod, and a Bible with half the pages torn out. No one knew what he was looking for, only that he paid cash, kept quiet, and rented a room facing west toward the fence line of the old Cunningham property. But every morning before dawn, Charles walked that fence, alone, watching the trees. And every night he came back, with dirt under his nails. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what Charles Weaver uncovered wasn't just disturbing, it was impossible. According to the motel owner, Charles kept meticulous notebooks, pages of sketches, calculations, names, symbols etched into the bark of certain trees. He said the stones in the ground didn't follow a burial pattern, but a sigil, a circular arrangement, older than the inn itself, older than the T-bone. And at the center, an absence, a gap in the geometry, a blank space where, according to Charles, something was removed. On April 13th, he told the front desk clerk he'd be gone by morning. He was scared, paranoid. He asked if there were churches open late, said the air was wrong, that he wasn't alone in the motel room anymore. That night he was seen running barefoot into the woods, his duffel swinging wildly, screaming a name no one understood. Edome. Edome's eye is open. They never found him, but 3 days later, a local hunter spotted something at the fence line, wedged into the barbed wire, soaked in blood. Charles's Bible. The cover had been peeled off, and scrawled across the first intact page in rust-red ink was a single phrase: "I saw the face beneath the roots." No one could explain the stains. Forensics ruled out animal blood and human, because whatever it was didn't match anything in the database. The motel room was emptied by the state the following week. The notebooks, gone. The Geiger counter, missing. And the property was purchased again, this time under a new LLC tied to a religious foundation based out of, Baltimore. But here's the part the state couldn't erase. That spring, every maple tree on the property bled dark sap. And for 11 nights straight, those who lived closest to the fence heard something in the wind, not words, not voices, laughter, feminine, mocking, and much too close. It was 1992 when the school bus incident finally made the papers, just a short piece in the back of the Harrodsburg Herald, half a column, no photo, buried beneath classifieds and a church bake sale ad. The headline read, "Mechanical malfunction causes delay on Route 6. But what actually happened that morning would never be spoken of in public again, not by the driver, not by the parents, and certainly not by the State Transportation Board, because what broke down that day wasn't the bus, it was reality. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from. Because if this story had leaked fully, if even one photograph had made it to national media, the entire Millbrook region would have been cordoned off by federal agencies within 24 hours. The driver, Miss Ellen Rhodes, was 61 years old. She'd been running the same rural route for 28 years without a single safety violation. But on April the 2nd, something happened just after she passed the old gravel road near the Quiet 40. The children started screaming, not because of a bump or a deer in the road, but because every single window on the bus had suddenly fogged from the outside, as if something was breathing against the glass. Then came the knock. 1, 2, 3. Slow, deliberate. From the emergency exit door at the rear, Ellen turned around but saw nothing. No animal, no person, only handprints, small, feminine, pressed from the outside but facing in. And then the engine died. No power, no brakes, no radio, just the quiet. One child, 9-year-old Daniel Munns, later drew what he saw through the fog in a school counseling session. The image was suppressed, but a janitor leaked it to a local preacher before dying in 2001. The drawing showed a girl, maybe 10 years old, standing barefoot on the back of the bus. But her arms were wrong, longer than her body, jointed backward. Her eyes were gone. In their place, deep black sockets, dripping. And above her head, a noose made of hair. Parents raised hell. Ellen was forced into retirement. The children were relocated to different routes. The bus was quietly decommissioned and scrapped at a Lexington yard. But that stretch of road, near the northeast edge of the Quiet 40, was paved over within the month, not repaired, not widened, just erased. And the official report? A coolant leak. But no one ever explained why the two boys who sat in the very back of the bus, Jacob and Samuel Hyde, never spoke again. Why not a word? To this day they live less than a mile from each other, and they cross the street when they pass. There's a house on the outskirts of Mercer County that no one lists on any map. No property tax records, no phone lines, no mailbox, but it's there, tucked behind the sycamores at the bend of Mill Creek, just beyond where the fog rolls thickest in autumn. They call it the Watcher's House, because someone or something inside has never stopped looking toward the Quiet 40. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because this isn't folklore. There are still people alive who've seen the curtains move when no one's home. Still a sheriff's log entry from 1978 that simply reads, "No break-in, no suspect, no footprints, just open eyes on the window pane." The earliest mention of the house comes from a coroner's report dated 1913. A man named Obadiah Cunningham, yes, that Cunningham, was found inside, seated upright at a rocking chair, eyes wide open, pupils dilated, dead. No wounds, no signs of poisoning, no struggle, just dead. Hands clasped in prayer, lips curled in what some called a grin, others a grimace. The house hadn't been built by him. He was placed there. The structure itself, logs dated far earlier, possibly late 1700s. No one knows who built it. No blueprints, no records. And yet the architecture is wrong. Doors slightly too narrow, ceilings slanted just enough to make you dizzy, stairs that descend deeper than the visible foundation. Locals say the Watcher's house faces exactly toward Plot 19 of the Millbrook graves, the one stone without a name, where visitors report the strongest nausea and the heaviest air. Some say it's aligned with the solstice sun, others say it's aligned with her voice, because those who've spent the night in the house on a dare or in desperation report the same three things every time: the sound of humming beneath the floorboards, a woman weeping fibrous rom inside the stove, and always, always, the figure standing just behind the glass facing in, even when the curtains are closed. In 1983, a young theology student from Louisville stayed overnight to write a thesis on Appalachian ritual structures. His notes, now archived at an unnamed seminary, end abruptly with one final sentence. "She is not buried. She is waiting." No one has dared to stay inside since, but the lights still come on some nights. Soft yellow flickers like an old oil lamp. And if you pass by in the fog, keep your eyes forward, because if you look at the Watcher's house too long, the curtains might not stay shut. There's an old mining ledger tucked away in the Mercer County Records office. It's brittle, faded, and most of the ink has bled into the page like spilled secrets. But one entry, dated February 11th, 1904, still holds. It reads, "Tunnel breached. Smell of sulfur, no coal, only singing." That mine was never supposed to be there. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because if your town has forgotten tunnels too, this story may feel closer than you think. It was a shallow shaft, dug illegally by a desperate prospector named Elijah Crowder. A Civil War veteran turned moonshiner, Elijah believed the land beneath the old Millbrook Inn hid more than just coal. He called it the Black Mouth, and he swore the sisters had buried something there after the fire. He wasn't entirely wrong. Elijah went down alone, rope tied to a post, pickaxe, lantern, a flask of rye whiskey. 3 hours later, his mule came running back, frothing at the mouth. When the sheriff and 2 deputies arrived, they found the rope snapped, clean, not frayed, a strange ash on the dirt, like soot that had never been hot. No sound from below, just darkness. It took them a full day to rig another descent. They found the lantern still burning, no Elijah. But carved into the stone at the base of the shaft, deep and deliberate, were 7 words. She said we would all forget her. The tunnel was collapsed the next morning. Officially, the ground was unstable. Unofficially, the sheriff quit 3 weeks later and moved to Indiana, where he never spoke of Kentucky again. Here's where it gets worse. In 1937, the county tried to reroute underground piping through the old mine area. Workers broke through a layer of unnatural stone, smooth as glass, wrong color for the region, and uncovered a cavity. Inside, a chair, hand-carved, child-sized, facing a wall. No bones, no clothing, just scratch marks, dozens, maybe hundreds, all circling the seat like a halo of desperate hands. The site was sealed that same night. The lead contractor was paid in cash by a man from Frankfurt wearing no ID badge. The payout was large. The silence, even larger. Because every time someone tries to dig, whether for progress, for oil, or for answers, something stirs, and whatever was buried there after the fire. She remembers. In 1929, a letter arrived at the Millbrook post office, postmarked from New Orleans, addressed in delicate, looping handwriting to a name no one recognized. Miss Lenora Ashwell, CO the Inn. But the Millbrook Inn had burned down 40 years earlier. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from. Because some letters aren't meant to be delivered, they're meant to wake things up. The postmaster, an old war widow named Mabel Crane, nearly tossed it into the dead letter bin. But something about the paper, aged but unwilted, caught her eye. She opened it, against regulations, read it once, then again, then she collapsed. Witnesses say her eyes were open, lips whispering, repeating one phrase. She came back wrong. The letter was confiscated, the contents sealed by the sheriff and sent to the state archives. It never arrived. But here's what the surviving note said, copied by a county clerk before it disappeared. Lenora, I saw her in the mirror. She knows we lied. She knows what you buried. It wasn't her body, it was the door. We didn't shut it, we only dressed it in lace. The name Lenora Ashwell raised an immediate red flag, because Ashwell hadn't been spoken aloud in Mercer County since the early 1850s. That family, if you can call it that, had a reputation. Isolation, whispers of seances, a child who went blind overnight, and a daughter named Lenora who vanished during the winter of 1849. No footprints, no ransom. Just a single glove on the windowsill, still warm. After that letter surfaced, 3 strange things happened. First, a young girl in town, age 9, began having dreams about a staircase with no end. She woke up screaming the same sentence over and over, "Don't follow the humming." Second, a man renovating a nearby barn uncovered a trunk sealed with tar. Inside, 27 old dolls, all with the same stitched face, all missing their left eye. And third, the church bells began ringing at 3:13 a.m., not 3 o'clock, not 3:15, 3:13, every night, for 13 nights. The church had no bell ringer, and the rope had been cut since 1906. The priest at the time locked the doors, then set them on fire. It didn't help. The dreams spread. One old woman claimed to see Lenora's name scratched into her cellar wall. Another said she heard a girl crying from inside her kitchen drain. And somewhere deep below the soil, the door they buried in lace began to tremble. The man who finally spoke her name out loud was Reverend Paul Bishop. It was a mistake. He came to Mercer County in 1942, fresh from seminary, full of purpose. He believed the old ghost stories were just that, stories, fables to keep children in line and sinners in church. But his arrogance would be the final key. The name had been unspoken for nearly a century, and Reverend Bishop, in his Easter sermon no less, shattered that silence. He said it boldly, Nora Ashwell. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because some names are not forgotten. They're waiting. At first, the congregation just stared. A silence fell so heavy that even the pews seemed to groan. One elderly woman fainted. A child began weeping for no reason, but Bishop pressed on, calling her a symbol of misguided fear. That night, he wrote in his personal journal what would later be recovered and archived by the county, 6 chilling words. I heard her voice in the walls. The church cat was found dead the next morning, its body untouched but its eyes removed, clean, bloodless, as if never there. Bishop's sermons changed. He began preaching in riddles, quoting verses that don't exist, referencing books that have never been published, like The Grief Doctrine and Anointed in Sulfur. He stopped sleeping. Neighbors reported seeing candlelight through his windows all night, chanting, sometimes laughter. Once, someone claimed to hear a child humming an old lullaby through the brick itself. Then, on the 7th Sunday after speaking her name, Reverend Bishop vanished. No struggle, no signs of escape. Just his clothes, folded neatly on the church steps. Inside the sanctuary, the entire congregation sat still, unmoving, unblinking, all 42 of them. When the sheriff arrived, he swore they were alive, but not present. It took 3 days for them to blink. 7 never spoke again. The altar had changed too. Beneath the cloth where the Bible should have rested was something else, a flat piece of wood, charred around the edges, etched with a child's handwriting that read, I remember being born inside the fire. A historian later connected the handwriting to a school record from 1847, a girl expelled for drawing impossible shapes in ink that bled through 12 pages. Her name, Lenora Ashwell, and now that her name had been spoken again, she no longer needed to wait. In the winter of 1943, just months after Reverend Bishop's disappearance, a structural engineer named Calvin Rusk was hired to inspect the old Millbrook foundations, where the inn once stood before the fire of 1887. He wasn't from Mercer County. He didn't know the stories, but he should have. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because some foundations weren't meant to be touched. They were meant to trap what's underneath. Rusk brought dynamite. His plan was simple: assess the stability of the land before a new county archive could be built over it. He surveyed the ground, marked off coordinates, and set 2 preliminary charges. Only one detonated. The second? It disappeared. Not misfired, not dismantled. Vanished. Wires sheared clean, as if someone, or something, had pulled it down through the soil. Unnerved but determined, Rusk dug by hand. He uncovered stone, dark, almost metallic, humming softly even in the cold. At its center was a perfect circular seal. No door, no latch, just a single phrase carved in reverse. Lace does not silence what sings. The ground trembled for the first time in 56 years. That night, the temperature dropped 17 degrees in under 10 minutes. Pipes burst, birds froze mid-flight, and a sound, some called it music, others said it was screaming, came up through the roots. Rusk returned home the next morning, except it wasn't home anymore. Neighbors described him walking up and down his porch, whispering the same thing into the wood. It's not a place, it's a pattern. 3 days later, he mailed a letter to the University of Cincinnati's Department of Geology. Inside were sketches, hexagonal layouts, mirror-inverted buildings, and what appeared to be a woman's face, surrounded by flames. At the bottom he scrawled, Lenora was never a person, she was the equation. Then silence. No one saw him again. But months later, hikers reported strange humming in the woods near Millbrook. Trees grew in spirals. A staircase made of warped oak was found leading to nowhere, just hanging in the air, unsupported. One child claimed to see a girl in white at the top, She held out her hand and asked a question that no one wanted to answer. "Do you want to see the other side of the fire?" No one climbed, not then. But the humming never stopped. By 1945, the federal government had taken notice. They called it a geological anomaly. But locals knew better. They knew when the humming started, people stopped dreaming. Not sleeping, dreaming. Whole towns went blank inside. No one remembered their sleep. No one wanted to. And the few who did, they either disappeared or went mad. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because when the government starts asking about dreams, the nightmare's already awake. Project Halberd was born that year. Officially, it was a seismic survey. Unofficially, it was a psychological operations unit under the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA. They weren't looking for oil. They were tracking vocal frequencies, resonances too deep for the human ear, but powerful enough to affect cognition, belief, even memory. The epicenter? The ruins of Millbrook Inn. Operatives set up sound traps, large steel chambers sunk into the earth. They reported hearing static at first, then faint speech, sometimes children laughing, sometimes women pleading. But what made them shut it down wasn't sound, it was language, because buried in that static was coherent Latin. Translated roughly, the phrase repeated was, "The cradle is not empty, the mother is watching." 4 of the 5 linguists resigned the same week. The 5th, the lead translator, Dr. Alphonse Greer, filed a final report and vanished before it reached Washington. That report was later found sealed in wax, hidden in the frame of an abandoned farmhouse 5 miles outside Mercer County. Its contents were never released, but the last page, handwritten in blue ink, was leaked by a janitor who claimed he was ordered to burn it. It read, "We were wrong. This isn't a haunting, it's a language system disguised as grief. It feeds on retelling. It's alive because we remember her name, her story, her fire. We are not being haunted. We are being rewritten." And underlined 3 times, "Stop saying her name." But by then it was too late, because Lenora Ashwell was being spoken again, whispered in college dorms, mumbled by sleepwalkers, scribbled into notebooks by children who had never visited Kentucky. She was no longer just a girl, she was becoming a lexicon, a pattern, a door. In the spring of 1946, a psychology professor from Boston named Dr. Miriam Halverson arrived in Mercer County. She'd read whispers of the Greer report, but more importantly, she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to. Photographs of children in Vermont, Arkansas, and Ohio drawing the same spiral. The Millbrook spiral. Same angles, same direction, same center. But when she showed those children a photograph of Lenora Ashwell, they all said the same thing. She hums when she's happy. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because when strangers start drawing maps to a place that's been erased, you're not chasing history anymore. You're following a signal. Dr. Halverson didn't come to disprove Lenora. She came to understand her, and what she found should have never been remembered. The fields behind the Ashwell estate, now overgrown with bitterbrush, were still warm. Soil analysis showed geothermal activity far too shallow for natural causes, and beneath that field, Dr. Halverson's team discovered a perfectly symmetrical cavity, 6 feet across, filled with cinders and lace. But the lace wasn't decayed, it was new, preserved, unstained, unburned, almost breathing. She took it back to Boston for further analysis. That's when the dreams began. First whispers throng, the walls. Then the humming, then the voices. Every member of her research team reported seeing a tall, faceless figure standing at the end of their beds, always silent, always watching. But the strangest incident happened on June 3, 1946. Dr. Halverson awoke at 3:12 a.m. to find her entire apartment rearranged. Every mirror had been shattered, every drawer emptied, and in the center of her kitchen table lay a folded piece of fabric. The same lace from Millbrook, stitched now with a phrase in red thread. "I was never in the fire. I was the match." Her team disbanded within the month. 2 suicides, 1 institutionalized. Dr. Halverson vanished while boarding a ferry to Provincetown. Her suitcase was found adrift days later, wrapped in rope and half submerged. Inside was a notebook sealed in wax, just like Greer's. Its final page was a list, 23 names, all girls, all missing between 1876 and 1944. And scrawled across the bottom, not in her handwriting, "The pattern needs new singers." Millbrook didn't bury its dead, it collected them. By 1947, the name Lenora Ashwell had been quietly redacted from every official document in Mercer County. Birth records, death certificates, property deeds. Even marriage licenses tied to the Ashwell family were mysteriously voided. But the strange thing wasn't the erasure. It was what remained. In courthouse basements and state archives, her name wasn't removed, it was burned through. Like something chemical had eaten the paper from the inside out. Just the name, just Lenora. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because when a name burns through history itself, it's no longer folklore, it's infection. A silent war was unfolding between those trying to forget and those being compelled to remember. That same year in St. Louis, a child named Thomas Webb began speaking Latin in his sleep. His family wasn't religious. The boy had never studied the language, but each night for 19 nights straight, he recited the same 3 lines, "In flamme natus sum, in memoria vives, ego sum Lenora." I was born in flame, in memory you live, I am Lenora. Doctors called it a neurological episode. But when researchers from the University of Chicago recorded and analyzed the speech pattern, they discovered something else. It was being broadcast, low-frequency pulses, not from the boy, but through him. That same signal had been detected in Kentucky, and in every town where a Millbrook-style spiral appeared, etched into the bark of dead trees, carved into chapel floors, and once even found inside the iris of a dead deer. Meanwhile, the disappearances resumed. 6 girls in 7 months, all aged between 9 and 13, all described as quiet, bright, or musically gifted. None found. But in a wheat field outside Elk Ridge, Arkansas, investigators discovered a chilling marker, 43 small stones arranged in a circle, each stone marked with a name, but only one was written in blood: Ashwell. The field was silent, except at night when local farmers swore they heard humming, not from a distance, but from beneath the soil. One man dug for 7 hours before police stopped him. He'd torn all his fingernails out trying to reach something. When asked what he was looking for, he said calmly, "She promised she'd come back if I remembered the song." There is no record of what song he meant, but his wife later found sheet music under their floorboards. It was a lullaby, no title, just 4 words written in the margin. She sings in ash. Lenora wasn't haunting history. She was rewriting its soundtrack. There was a time, brief, flickering, when the Ashwell name was almost forgotten. By 1952, Kentucky newspapers had stopped reporting the strange disappearances, the fires, the graves. But silence doesn't mean peace. It means something darker has settled in. And then came Room 43. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because Room 43 still exists, not on a map, not in a blueprint, but in the architecture of memory, shared by people who've never met. But all swear it looked the same. In 1952, a World War II veteran named Joseph Mallory checked into a small psychiatric facility outside Cincinnati. He wasn't violent, just exhausted. He claimed he hadn't slept in 5 days because she stands at the edge of my bed and counts backward from 43 every single night. Doctors assumed PTSD. They sedated him. He woke up screaming, not just that night, but every night, always at 3:43 a.m., always shouting the same thing: "Don't let her open the door. It's not a door, it's a throat." Then others started speaking it too. Roommates, orderlies, even the head nurse. No one remembered saying it, but it kept echoing through the halls until the staff began calling the hallway itself the throat. Room 43 was bricked shut in August of that year, but that didn't stop her. Because Room 43 wasn't a place, it was a numbered entry point, a countdown, a re-entry slot into the waking world. In the fall of that same year, a child in Georgia drowned in a lake that had been dry since 1931. His body was recovered, but something was etched into his chest. Namshud 42. The next year in Nevada, a retired schoolteacher was found dead in her home. Her walls were completely covered in musical notes, like some frenzied symphony etched in panic. Above her body, scrawled in her own handwriting, "She has opened 41. No one could explain what the numbers meant, but in each case before their deaths, the victims described a singing girl in a white dress, humming an old tune, one eye clouded white as smoke. They called her different names, but their drawings were all the same, and in the upper corner of every sketch, one phrase appeared, Ashwell returning. They say the countdown began in 1904 with a girl named Lenora who sang to the dying before they knew they were dead. They say every time we forget her, she climbs one step closer, one grave, one note, but in one room at a time. In the dimness of truth, there are things that don't just haunt. They reconstruct, piece by piece, body by body, memory by memory. And the Ashwells were never building a legacy. They were building a path. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because this isn't just about a family. It's about the design. In 1955, cryptographer Alice Rayburn, formerly of the Navy, began investigating a strange pattern in early American cemeteries. She believed some graveyards weren't designed by local churches or town councils. They were built according to something older. She never said cult in her notes. She said, "I think these people were drawing something, a face, from above." Rayburn visited 19 towns across the Appalachian region, mapping the orientation of tombstones, especially in remote family plots. The names Ashwell, Cunningham, McCready, and Bell appeared too often, and in every layout, the graves lined up across state borders in the exact geometric angle of a human eye socket. One in Kentucky, another in Tennessee, a third in western Pennsylvania, all of it forming the socket of a face buried across hundreds of miles. A face we weren't supposed to see. She called it the mourner's geometry. And it wasn't just symbolic, it was functional. When Rayburn disappeared in late '56, her final letter was never mailed. It was found on her desk, written in fevered shorthand. The face is almost complete, only the mouth remains, and I know where it is. They call it Hollow Bend, and they've been feeding it with stories, with silence, and with girls who don't scream. The FBI labeled her case a suicide. Her body was never recovered, but 2 weeks later her assistant received a package, no return address. Inside, a single slide photograph, black and white, blurry, clearly taken from above, perhaps aerial reconnaissance. It showed a cluster of gravestones. And then, if you looked just right, it wasn't gravestones at all. It was a jaw, open, and at its center, a blackened farmhouse with the number 39 scorched into its roof. People who saw that image reported strange symptoms, tinnitus, vertigo, nosebleeds. One man claimed he saw the farmhouse door open in the photo, but there was no one inside, just shadow and a child's drawing of a woman without a face. The Ashwells didn't build homes, they built mouths, and we've been living inside them for decades. Some maps don't lead to places, they lead to events, and once you follow them, you can't go back to being the person who didn't. By 1962, the Ashwell name had nearly disappeared from public records. No census entries, no births, no deaths. It was as if the bloodline had folded inward, like paper burned too close to the flame. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because this next piece of the puzzle changes everything. In a declassified military memo from Fort Detrick, dated October 2, 1962, an officer named Colonel Graves filed an incident report titled Unexplained Neural Disruptions, Cluster Event Number 19. The location? A now-razed coal town in West Virginia named Hollow Bend. Population, 312. Reported symptoms: shared nightmares, non-verbal trance states, auditory hallucinations of a woman humming inside walls. Duration, 3 days. Casualties, 11 suicides, 3 disappearances. Colonel Graves described one building in particular, a dilapidated white house at the southern edge of the town with black handprints burned into the ceiling. Local children called it Ash House. Babasaiwabo. Haim. The adults refused to say its name at all. One teenage girl, Judith Ryman, was found alive inside the home's root cellar, barefoot and silent, clutching a small cloth-bound book. She never spoke again, but the book she carried, later archived in a restricted government vault, was titled in a strange hybrid of Latin and English, Domus Obscura, the Mother's Mouth. It was filled with meticulous drawings, not of places or people, but of rooms that couldn't exist. Staircases that descended into themselves, windows that showed other centuries, portraits that wept from the inside out. One sketch showed a woman in a long black dress, her face blurred, seated in a rocking chair made entirely of human pelvis bones. Underneath, a caption in shaky English read, "She watches the mouth so it stays shut, but every century it opens." The military tried to burn the ash house. It didn't catch, not the first time, not the second. On the third attempt, the entire block went up in flames, except for the root cellar, which remained untouched, cold as iron. Inside, when they returned days later, was something no one could explain. A wooden cradle, rocking, empty, still warm. Whatever the Ashwells had created, it wasn't a home, it was a womb, and now something had been born. There's a silence that doesn't come from absence. It comes from containment, and the town of Hollow Bend had been silenced in a way no rebuilding could ever undo. After the fire, Fort Detrick sealed the investigation, code-labeled the event as a resonant psychological anomaly. But off the record, Colonel Graves wrote one final sentence in his private field log. "Whatever the Ashwells left behind, it's not done gestating." Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because now we're peeling back the skin of something America deliberately tried to forget. In 1974, 20 years after the fire, an independent researcher named Eleanor Vale published a banned monograph titled The Children Beneath, a study in recurring lineages. It was immediately blacklisted. Vale was discredited, her academic tenure revoked. But in one obscure surviving copy found in the archives of a defunct occult society in New Orleans, she made a chilling claim. The Ashwells never vanished. They migrated, not as people, as memes of consciousness. She pointed to over 40 post-1950 incidents across the U.S., from school outbreaks of synchronized sleepwalking to mass delusions involving a woman in black whispering from walls. Each town shared 3 traits: a failed coal mine or salt shaft beneath it, a historic building with unregistered blueprints, a local folk tale about a second mother who lives under the floorboards. In 1979, Vale disappeared. Her last known note was found scrawled on the mirror of her bathroom. "The house is pregnant again." It was signed strangely, E. Ashwell. But Eleanor Vale had no known relation to the Ashwell family. At least, not on paper. So where does myth end and blood begin? In a hidden memo declassified only in 2008, a DARPA analyst admitted that their own AI model flagged the Ashwell name as a recursive signal, meaning the name kept showing up, not just in language, but in patterns of behavior, architecture, even in migration paths. The Ashwell house, it seems, wasn't a structure. It was a blueprint, an emotional architecture, passed through lineage, imitation, obsession, a womb of thought, self-replicating, silent until ripe. And by 1980, whispers of a new Ashwell construction began surfacing, this time in Oregon, in the forest, built by hands that never applied for permits, funded by sources that had no bank trails, a new mouth, waiting to open. They called it the Second Hearth. It wasn't a home, it wasn't on any map. And yet, in the dense pine wilderness outside Klamath Falls, Oregon, under a moonless sky in October 1980, something was built. No architectural plans, no construction crews, no electrical grid, but it stood, a perfect replica of the Ashwell estate, down to the rotting floorboards, the twin staircase, and the hearth where fire had once spoken in reverse. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what happened next wasn't architecture, it was resurrection. Locals say they heard hymns but no church, smelled iron but found no rust. And at night, they said the wind carried the cries of children, begging to be let out of the walls. The property was surrounded by sigils burned into the trees, ancient diagrams of embryonic loops and serpents feeding on their own shadows. One man, a forestry worker named Tom Riley, went missing while clearing fire breaks near the area. His chainsaw was found 11 miles away, standing upright in the center of the forest floor, still humming. No footprints, no drag marks, just one sentence scratched into the bark of a cedar nearby. I remembered her face, but it wasn't mine. Within 2 months, 3 more disappearances followed. All were contractors hired to investigate illegal structures. None returned, but one left behind a camcorder. What's on that tape is now buried in legal bureaucracy and marked with a federal classification code, YVT, Youth Vector Transmission. But leaked frames exist, and in them, the camera pans across the upper floor, the light flickers, and for 2 seconds, just 2 seconds, the face of Matilda Ashwell is seen staring directly at the lens, not aged, not decayed, exactly as she appeared in 1947, smiling. The house, as DARPA analyst Clay Thomas later admitted in a redacted deposition, was not a reconstruction, it was an echo. A place formed by collective memory, not labor, by grief, by myth, by the need for something to return. And that's when the real questions began to surface. Was the Ashwell tragedy an isolated family incident, or was it a prototype, a test run, to see if memory alone can terraform matter, if belief can rewrite geography? And if so, who designed the original script? Who keeps building the next echo? You were never supposed to see the blueprints. They weren't filed with any city. They weren't created with ink or CAD. They were written, etched, into the backside of children's drawings found inside the Whispering Pines Orphe, Anaj in 1886, and again beneath the plaster walls of the second hearth in Oregon, nearly a century later. Same measurements, same room structure, same symbols hidden in the skirting boards, each one resembling a twisted Fibonacci spiral terminating in a human eye. By 1981, private researchers began noticing the pattern. 13 buildings across the continental U.S., all abandoned, all hidden, all exact replicas of the Ashwell home. But here's where it gets worse. Each was found within a mile of an orphanage or children's care home closed under unethical conditions. Each bore signs of non-human acoustics, unregistered frequencies that caused nosebleeds, seizures, or in one case, temporary retrograde amnesia. One researcher, Dr. Lenora Vale, spoke publicly just once. In a shaky interview recorded from her car, she said, "They're not buildings, they're memory conductors, resonance cages. They don't house people, they feed on moments." 2 weeks later, she vanished, all footage scrubbed. Only a single low-resolution transcript remains, where she refers to an internal group called the Counterline Committee, allegedly founded in 1874 after the Ashwell event. Their purpose? To locate, replicate, and scale trauma-generated structures. Not to stop them, not to contain them, but to harvest them. Because what no one wants to say aloud is this: these homes are not haunted by spirits, they're haunted by possibility. The possibility that thought, memory, and suffering can carve blueprints into reality. That human grief is a design tool, that with enough collective belief and the right environmental conditions, the past can be rebuilt brick by brick. So what really happened to the Ashwell family in 1947 wasn't an accident. It wasn't even a haunting. It was the first successful resonance alignment, an experiment so precise, so catastrophic, it etched itself into the earth like a scar, and ever since, someone or something has been trying to repeat it, not for nostalgia, not for closure, but to unlock the final formula, how to make memory live forever. They call it the Singing Lintel, a slab of red oak carved in 1846, so ordinary in appearance, so dull to the eye, that even expert historians dismissed it as decorative trim from the Ashwell dining room archway. But the noise it made wasn't decorative. When the wind passed through the broken upstairs window and struck that beam just right, it hummed, a low, bone-deep resonance, like a foghorn underwater, or a mother humming to a child in a room with no furniture. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from if you've ever heard a house make a sound that didn't belong to physics. The Ashwell carpenters had no explanation, neither did the descendants of the original mill workers who harvested that tree, but one word, burned into the lintel's underside, terrified even seasoned linguists. Sequentia. Latin, no, it doesn't translate. But old members of the now defunct Vermont Order of Substructural Harmonics believed it to be a command, not a word, a trigger. The lintel was removed in 1952 after a rash of auditory hallucinations drove the cleanup crew to flee. One man reported hearing his mother, dead 10 years, whispering in perfect detail the lullaby she sang to him as a boy. Only, his mother never sang. And the lullaby? It didn't exist. No melody. No lyrics, just the idea of comfort without memory. The singing lintel disappeared from public records in 1957. Some say it was acquired by a university in Illinois. Others believe it was burned, but that's impossible, because in 1998, in the ruins of a chapel in coastal Maine, the same tone was detected, same frequency, same harmonic decay. And guess what was found in the rubble? A lintel. Identical. Same word beneath. Sequentia. Carbon dating confirmed it wasn't the same object. So how do two identical objects with the same untranslatable inscription exist on opposite sides of the country, 140 years apart? Because they were never built. They were remembered into existence, not by architects, but by victims, by witnesses whose trauma, like music, left grooves on the world itself. And now these echoes are multiplying. Each new discovery suggests a larger system at work, a kind of acoustic architecture designed not for living in, but for listening through. But the question we must ask isn't who built them, it's who's still listening. In 1903, the Ashwell children were taken, quietly, without headlines, by the state. 5 in total, all under the age of 12, removed from the property in the dead of night. No official report was ever filed, no photographs, no court hearings, no public record of the parents' objections. Only one surviving letter remains. It was written by Ruth Ashwell, the mother, and it was never sent. The letter wasn't addressed to Child Protective Services or to a court. It was addressed to the Watcher in the Orchard. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, especially if you've ever found a letter that was never meant for human eyes. The contents of Ruth's letter are chilling not for what they say, but for what they assume the reader already understands. We gave you the bone, we gave you the blood, but you take what's not yours. I kept them quiet. I hid the sounds. You said 5 winters, no more. This makes 6. You lied. This wasn't a mother pleading with a government or a church. This was a woman bargaining with something ancient, something she believed had made a deal. Investigators who studied the property in the 1950s uncovered disturbing details from nearby farms. Livestock vanishing overnight, strange symbols carved into the bark of orchard trees, and children who sleepwalked into the woods barefoot in the snow. But the orchard, that's the part most people miss. Those apple trees, they weren't planted, they were found. 26 trees in perfect rows, with roots that extend far to years, deeper than any known apple species. Soil analysis revealed something else. Beneath those trees, the land is not native to Vermont. It has a different pH, different microbial structure, as if it were transplanted from another region entirely, or another world. The Watcher in the Orchard is mentioned in 3 other historical records dating back to the 1600s, always near sudden disappearances, always near children. But in the Ashwell case, the pattern shifted, because something provoked it. Something broke the truce. And if Ruth Ashwell's unsent letter is to be believed, the children were not simply taken, they were claimed, as payment for a debt the family had long forgotten, but never stopped owing. A debt that may still be active, because every 7th winter, 5 new trees bloom in that orchard, and no one ever sees them planted. In 1910, a railway surveyor named Henry Bell went missing near the Ashwell property. His last known telegram said only, "The trees are humming again." That message arrived 5 minutes after midnight. His body was never recovered, and yet 8 months later, his notebook turned up, half-frozen, waterlogged, and left neatly on the Ashwell doorstep. Inside that notebook, Henry Bell had written something over and over, as if rehearsing a warning to himself. Don't look at the one in the middle. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, especially if you've ever felt a forest was watching you back. Researchers who analyzed the orchard in 1972 found that one tree, the central one, produced no blossoms, no fruit, and no insect activity. It cast no shade, even in full sun, and the roots of nearby trees curved away from it unnaturally, as if repelled by something deeper underground. One arborist attempted to cut a small core sample from the center tree. His hands began bleeding before the blade touched bark. The metal itself warped and snapped like it had struck stone or bone. He never returned to the property. Local legend claims that the central tree isn't a tree at all. They call it the spire, and they say it predates the Ashwell family, the settlers, and even the Abenaki tribes who avoided the land long before the arrival of colonists. A stone circle surrounds it underground, buried 10 feet deep, aligned to a lunar calendar that no longer matches modern astronomy. And the soil immediately beneath that spire? It's not soil, it's ash, pure, fine human ash. In 1959, a group of geology students from Dartmouth came to investigate the orchard. Only one returned. She was found walking in circles along a rural road, repeating the phrase, "It doesn't sleep, it waits, it remembers." When asked what it was, she pointed behind the interviewer. There was nothing there. She died of cardiac arrest 2 days later. Age 22. Cause listed as unknown stressor. To this day, no one has been able to determine what lies beneath the spire. Ground-penetrating radar fails within 5 feet. Drills snap, samples melt, and the humming, always the humming, returns whenever someone gets too close. The orchard is not dead. It's waiting. And every time someone tries to forget, it plants another reminder. June 18, 1977. The Ashwell land had been abandoned for over a decade, left to rot under creeping vines and a silence too thick to feel natural. That's when a real estate investor named Carl Dietrich bought the property at auction for $6,200, a steal by any measure. His plan was simple: bulldoze the farmhouse, clear the orchard, and parcel the land for luxury cabins. He never made it to the second week. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, especially if you believe land can remember what happened on it. Carl hired a local demolition team to begin leveling the orchard first. On day one of the bulldozer operators, Thomas Reagan, struck something beneath the roots of the central tree. He thought it was stone at first, but it rang like metal. Hollow metal. 4 hours later, Reagan was gone, vanished without a trace. His bulldozer was still running when the crew found it, engine humming, claw buried deep into the earth, but not a footprint nearby. They searched the woods for 3 days. Nothing. On the 4th day, a pair of hiking boots was found placed perfectly on the porch of the Ashwell farmhouse. Inside one boot, Reagan's wedding ring, still warm. That night, Carl Dietrich called his lawyer and begged him to reverse the sale. He offered to eat the cost, pay a penalty, sign any waiver necessary. The lawyer refused. Contract law doesn't care about ghosts. Dietrich returned to the orchard alone. At 3:12 a.m., police received a call from his number. The voice on the other end was whispering frantically. "It's underneath the orchard," the voice hissed. "It's not human. I touched its skin. It's cold stone. I saw the names. On its ribs. They were written backwards." The call lasted exactly 33 seconds. They found Dietrich's body the next morning in the upstairs hallway of the Ashwell house. No signs of forced entry. No physical wounds. Just one thing. His mouth had been filled with soil. And on the mirror, scrawled in filth, was a phrase no one could explain. "You picked the wrong tree." The land was never resold. It's been marked as uninhabitable on county records ever since. But the central tree still stands, unmoving, unchanging, and every decade, without fail, someone else decides they don't believe in the stories. Until the orchard decides otherwise. They called it the Tree of Teeth after that. Not officially, of course. The county wouldn't allow it on the records, but among the locals, especially those whose families had lived near the Ashwell property for generations, It became a whispered phrase you didn't say near children or at night. And there was a reason for that name. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, especially if you believe the Earth remembers everything it's ever buried. In 1983, a University of Michigan anthropology team got special permission to conduct a non-invasive soil scan of the Ashwell orchard. They used ground-penetrating radar to map the subterranean layers under the tree line. It was part of a broader study on Appalachian land history. No one told them what had happened there. What they found still sits, unaired and sealed, in the university archives. Because that scan revealed something impossible. Below the roots of the orchard, at exactly 13 feet in depth, were hundreds of curved objects, layered like scales, perfectly symmetrical, each one precisely 4 inches in length. The scan technician, thinking they were fossilized animal bones, marked the anomaly for further excavation, but one student assistant, a sophomore named Marianne Reed, had a background in forensic odontology. She took one look at the digital render and said without hesitation, "They're human molars, hundreds of them." The project was shut down the next day. The official reason? Equipment failure due to groundwater interference. But Marianne later told her roommate that the supervising professor received a late-night call from someone in D.C. and left town the next morning without even packing his office. That winter, Marianne took her own life. She left a single page pinned to her dorm wall, a sketch of the orchard tree, bark twisting into something like knuckles, branches like arms reaching upward, and behind the tree, something crouched beneath the roots, watching, waiting, smiling. The smile was made entirely of teeth. When campus security searched her room, they found her notes stuffed into a shoebox under her bed. Every page had the same line scrawled at the bottom. "It's not a tree, it's what the tree grew from." Since then, no team has ever been allowed back onto the Ashwell land for study, but locals say, "Hey, the tree hums on quiet nights, and if you press your ear to the bark, they say you can still hear chewing. They say the bark tastes like iron." A hiker named Dale Forrester found that out in 1991, the hard way. He was a Vietnam veteran, stoic, quiet, and not one to believe in stories. Lived alone in a trailer 20 miles west of Mill Hollow. No family, no close friends. Just him, the woods, and an old Nikon camera. One spring, Dale decided to document every forgotten trail in the Appalachian corridor. He mapped the ridgelines, photographed abandoned cabins, cataloged crumbled stone markers, until, one fog-heavy morning, he wandered too close to the Ashwell orchard. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, especially if you believe some places should be left unvisited. Dale didn't know what he was walking into. All he knew was that his compass went haywire. The needle spun, reversed, and froze. Then the wind died. Then the smell hit, like copper and rot. And then, in that stillness, he saw the orchard. Bare trees, black branches, ground cracked dry beneath them. He stepped closer. Just a few photos, he thought. But when he raised the camera, his hand began to tremble, because the trees weren't trees. They were something else. Something built. Twisted bone, knotted muscle, a shape that mimicked bark but twitched when you stared too long. Dale couldn't be sure. He dropped the camera and leaned against the nearest trunk, his heart pounding in his ears. He said it felt warm, not just warm, alive, and on impulse he stuck out his tongue. The bark, if you can call it that, tasted metallic, rusted, thick with a strange tang like licking a coin, and underneath, a hint of something saltier. He spat it out, stumbled back, and that's when he saw the scar forming across his tongue, like a brand, a shape he couldn't identify. Something spiral, ancient, wrong. 2 hours later, Dale staggered into the ranger station at Mill Hollow, eyes wide, tongue blackened. He couldn't speak, just pointed over and over toward the woods behind him. The rangers took him to a hospital in Lexington, but within 24 hours, his vitals flatlined. Autopsy inconclusive. They cremated him the next morning. The film in his Nikon? Every frame was black, except one. It showed Dale, standing in front of the orchard, his mouth open in a scream. Behind him the trees were leaning, reaching, and one of them had an eye, a human eye, embedded in the bark, and it was looking straight into the lens. Sometimes late at night, the nurses at Black Hollow Asylum still whisper about patient 13. They're not supposed to. The files were sealed in 1962, the wing she stayed in demolished in 73, and her name, never written, only spoken, was struck from every record. But the staff remember. Not her face exactly, not her age or background, just the way she sat, motionless in a corner, for 13 years. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, especially if you've ever heard a story that institutions tried to bury. She arrived barefoot, no belongings, covered in a thin, dirt-stained linen robe with a single stitched emblem over the heart, a symbol like a spiraled eye. The doctors assumed she was mute, possibly feral. Her fingers had grown thin and long, the nails nearly translucent. Her skin, pale as paper, but it was her eyes that disturbed them most, blackened not with makeup or illness, but something deeper, like they'd seen a world no human should see. She never slept, not once. Nurses reported that when they walked past her cell at night, she would already be staring at them through the slit in the door, unblinking, still. Then the disappearances began. Orderly Wilkins vanished first, a kind man, used to feeding her, coaxing her to speak. One morning, he didn't clock in. His keys were found just outside her cell, nothing else. 3 weeks later, a psychiatrist, Dr. Helena Marks, attempted an experimental hypnotic regression session with patient 13. The session lasted 6 minutes. At minute 7, Dr. Marks screamed so violently that her vocal cords ruptured. She never spoke again. Later, under sedation, she wrote one sentence over and over in her journal. She remembers Millbrook. That's the detail that cracked it open, because there was no way she could have known. Millbrook had been wiped from maps, the Ashwell name redacted from public history, the orchard burned and buried under federal orders in 1951, and yet, patient 13 drew it. Every twisted tree, every spiral-marked doorframe, every coffin-sized cellar hatch. And in one drawing, she depicted herself kneeling in the orchard surrounded by women in linen robes, all holding hands in a circle around a child suspended in midair. The child was screaming, and above it, a towering black figure with no face, only a mouth, wide, stitched and trembling. One nurse, who stayed after hours to study her sketches, went missing the next morning. The sketches? Gone. Her notes? Erased. And patient 13? She was found dead in her cell with her own spine wrapped around her neck like a rosary. Autopsy ruled it self-inflicted. But the janitor swore he saw black bark growing across the walls of her room the night before. They should have burned the body, but protocol dictated otherwise. Patient 13 was preserved, embalmed, and sealed in the asylum's sub-basement morgue, a place already steeped in unexplainable events. But what happened next broke every law of medicine, every rule of science, and every thread of sanity that remained inside Black Hollow. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, especially if you've ever wondered what the body remembers after death. It began with the smell, first sweet, then acidic. Morgue staff described it as a mix of rotting wood and ozone, like a thunderstorm trapped underground. When they checked her drawer, her body had moved, not shifted, not rolled. Turned. She was facing the opposite direction, eyes open, mouth sealed with black thread. Security footage from that night? Gone. But the janitor on duty claimed he heard scraping sounds, slow, rhythmic, like tree branches against stone. He quit the next morning, refused his final paycheck, and fled the state. Still, the order came from above. Keep her preserved. Do not destroy the remains. A government official, name redacted in every log, visited 2 days later. Tall, dressed in gray, wearing gloves despite the summer heat. He asked to be alone with the body for 9 minutes. When he left, he said one thing: if she wakes again, run. 2 nights later, every camera in the sub-basement glitched for exactly 13 minutes. When staff entered afterward, her drawer was empty, but it wasn't opened. The metal was bent outward like something had pushed from the inside. The room, covered in thin, spiraled carvings etched into the walls, floor, even the ceiling tiles. No tool could have done it. No hand could move like that. A week passed. Then another disappearance. This time it wasn't staff, it was a child, 7 years old, son of a nurse who forgot her keycard and had brought him in briefly after hours. She left him for 90 seconds to grab a file. 90 seconds. Gone. His voice was never heard again, but his laughter, recorded faintly on the last hallway camera, echoed down the basement stairwell, mingled with whispers and a strange scraping rhythm. That was the last straw. The sub-basement was sealed with concrete, not decommissioned, entombed. And yet, on the anniversary of her death, every year, someone places a fresh linen robe on the steps of Black Hollow's ruins. No footprints, no sightings, but stitched over the heart in trembling black thread is always the same phrase: the robe was only the beginning. In 1949, 12 years after the Whispering Pines orphan, age burned to the ground and LaToya's body vanished from the morgue, something new began, something that would haunt the bloodlines of everyone involved. It started small. Children born in nearby towns, Randolph, Montpelier, Bar, began speaking words they'd never been taught. Latin phrases, obscure dialects traced to 13th century Bavarian monasteries. A few spoke in perfect French, Old French, despite being born to English-only families in Vermont dairy farms. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, especially if you've ever known a child who seemed to remember too much. What made it worse was what they remembered. One boy in Stowe told his mother, "Don't let the men take me to the tunnels again. LaToya showed me how to hide the silver key." A girl in Hardwick began drawing diagrams of the old asylum's underground chambers, rooms even demolition crews didn't know existed. These children weren't possessed, they were remembering. Descendants of nurses, orderlies, priests, and politicians who'd touched the Millbrook case. Their grandchildren were dreaming her memories. And they were not just dreams. Some had bruises, scratches, long, symmetrical marks down their backs, as if they'd been carried by something that didn't walk like a man. Dr. Evelyn Braddock, a child psychologist from Boston, interviewed 7 of them over 3 years. She believed they were manifesting intergenerational trauma until one girl handed her a hand-drawn sigil, the same sigil carved into the morgue walls where LaToya had vanished. Braddock vanished a month later. Her apartment was found undisturbed except for a single item on the kitchen table, a photograph of the Whispering Pines orphanage, dated 1886. The problem? It was a new photo. Color. High resolution. Taken long after the building had burned down, and at the window, staring out, was LaToya. Same white nightgown, same braid. But her eyes looked aware of the camera, like she knew someone would be watching, and at the bottom, scrawled in what appeared to be charcoal mixed with bone ash, 4 chilling words: "I never went away." The state sealed all orphanage files. The land was sold to a private buyer with no paper trail. Locals said nothing, but every August 3rd, the anniversary of the fire, they leave their porch lights off. Because sometimes when you leave them on, the doorbell rings, and a girl's voice whispers, "Do you remember me now? The state buried it. The churches silenced it, but some truths don't rot." In the summer of 1972, a Vermont soil survey team unknowingly unearthed something they should have never touched. While drilling near the old Whispering Pines property line, on land thought to be untainted, they struck an underground chamber. The drill head jammed on bone, not stone, not fossils, bone, and not just any bone. The radius belonged to a child, judging by the size, but it was charred black and embedded with copper wiring. When examined in Montpelier's lab, it showed no signs of natural decay, as if it had been preserved or repurposed. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, especially if you've ever seen a place where the ground felt wrong. That same week, 2 surveyors quit. One was found dead in a hotel bathtub in Middlebury, both eyes gouged. No sign of forced entry. On the mirror, written backwards in condensation, "She waits beneath." The survivor, Miles Weatherby, retreated into the Green Mountains, refusing to ever speak publicly, but in 1979 he mailed one final package to a local historian, a cassette tape. What it captured is now infamous in Vermont folklore, but you've never heard the full version. The audio begins with humming, a child's voice, sweet and melodic, reciting what sounds like a lullaby, but halfway through it shifts into sobbing, then screaming, then silence, and then, at exactly 2 minutes and 13 seconds, a woman's voice. Ice, layered over static, says, "You let them take me. You buried me in wires. Now I remember the way back." That voice, it matched no known living person, but its vocal print was 98% consistent with archived orphanage recordings of LaToya Cunningham, last verified in 1937. The state declared the tape a hoax, but here's the detail they never released to the public. The pitch frequency of the voice emitted a near infrasonic tone, 19 Hz. That's the same frequency known to induce panic, nausea, and hallucinations in human beings, not through words, through resonance, which means the tape wasn't meant to speak to you. It was meant to open something in you, and the question no one's been brave enough to answer: what if it worked? What if those who hear her become part of her? And what if she's not haunting Whispering Pines anymore? Because she's moved into us. They thought burying the building would bury the screams. But evil doesn't stay buried. In 1991, a demolition crew finally razed what was left of the Whispering Pines orphanage. They bulldozed through splintered beams and soot-stained stones, reducing history to dust. No press, no markers, just a quiet effort to erase what couldn't be explained. But the ground resisted. Machinery failed without warning. Workers reported hearing children laughing from inside the rubble. One man, Nate Callahan, dropped his sledgehammer mid-swing and never picked it up again. He left Vermont, never returned, and in a letter to his brother wrote, "It watched me from the ashes. It knew my name, and it remembered something I didn't." Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, especially if your town has a place no one talks about. The soil beneath the orphanage was found to be unnaturally metallic. Magnetic readings spiked. Geological surveyors claimed it contained elements not native to the region. But the tests were inconclusive because the samples disappeared, vanished from locked vaults, and then the dreams began. Residents of nearby towns, most of them elderly, started reporting identical nightmares. A woman in a red dress with hair like smoke, always humming, always offering her hand, and always whispering the same phrase, "Come back home, I still have your name." Some claimed it was just mass hysteria, others said it was a memory passed down through blood, but the pattern was undeniable. Every person who dreamt of her had either worked at the orphanage, had a parent who did, or had been treated in one of the state-run institutions that shared staff with Whispering Pines. And when local librarian Thea Morton compiled the dream reports into a private file, she found something horrifying. The names of the dreamers matched the names on the orphanage's forgotten intake logs. Children who were reported dead, children who were never adopted, children who were never supposed to be found again. So where had they gone? Where had their souls been stored, if not buried? And why? Why now was the world starting to remember? Maybe you feel it too, that strange sense of déjà vu when you pass an abandoned building, that sudden shiver when a child hums an old lullaby, that pull toward a place you've never been but somehow recognize. It's not your imagination, it's a call, LaToya's call, and once you've heard it, you never walk alone again.